Imagine that you fulfill the greatest dream of your life, watching a Formula One race at one of the most legendary circuits in the category, at Ferrari's home, Monza. You see the best drivers in the world arrive, you feel the roar of the engines, and your excitement is at its peak. And not only that, but your favorite driver, one of the Ferrari men, has everything he needs to be crowned champion in front of his people, in his own home. Right before the race, you notice something strange. In the area where you are, there aren't proper safety measures in case of an accident, but you don't pay much attention to it. Then the moment arrives, the race starts, and your favorite driver loses several positions right from the start. But that doesn't matter too much because you trust him. You know he's going to recover. But on the second lap, the unthinkable happens. A terrifying scene you never saw coming. The driver you came to cheer for crashes into another car, his single-seater lifts off and flies right in front of you. Your heart stops. The fright is huge, but you're okay. And even though you're still in shock, something brings you back to reality. Screams, cries for help, panic, agony. You look to your side and the scene is indescribable. Your favorite driver's car ran over 15 spectators who were right there next to you. People you had seen arrive just minutes before, now all dead. You look back at the track and what you see completely destroys you. Your favorite driver has also died. After taking the lives of the spectators in that unprotected area, he was thrown from his car and died instantly. So what was supposed to be one of the best days of your life turned into the most traumatic moment you will ever experience. What I just told you happened during the 1961 Italian Grand Prix at Monza, and it is remembered as the greatest tragedy. In the history of Formula One today, I'm going to tell you everything that happened that day. How a driver died in a race that was about to crown him world champion. How an absurd decision by the organizers allowed the catastrophe to happen despite warnings from drivers and teams. And how that accident, the deadliest in the history of Formula One, became known as the most chilling and tragic in the sport. Stay until the end to find out who was responsible for this tragedy and what happened to them. Formula. Wolfgang von Trips was born on May 4, 1928. The only son of Count von Trips and heir to one of the oldest dynasties in Germany. He grew up under the strictness of nobility until, at the age of 14, he fell ill with polio. The illness almost left him paralyzed, but ironically, it ended up being his salvation. Thanks to it, he avoided being recruited by the Hitler Youth during World War II. After the conflict, he began studying agricultural engineering, as his father wanted, who hoped he would take over the family business. But secretly, he kept two passions: horses and cars. In 1953, he made a decision. He didn't want a life in the fields. He wanted to be a race car driver. At first, his father opposed and reminded him of the number of drivers who had died in the 1930s. However, he eventually accepted with one very clear condition. If Wolfgang raced, he had to be the best. He couldn't be just any driver. As the last von Trips, he had to become world champion or die trying. That mandate marked him, and with the support of his family, he secured a contract with Porsche and later with Mercedes. In 1956, he raced in the 24 Hours of Le Mans, where he finished 5th. And the following year, he made the jump to Ferrari to debut in Formula One. The beginnings were tough. His aggressive style earned him several accidents and the nickname Count Crash. But over time, he managed to establish himself as a key member of the team. In 1957, he achieved a podium in Monza, and in 1958, he added another one in France. However, the deaths of teammates like Eugenio Castellotti and Alfonso Deportato hit him deeply and led him to leave Ferrari in 1959. Although that same year, he returned to the team after an unsuccessful stint with Porsche. In 1970, he competed in almost the entire season and finished 7th in the championship. The prelude to what was to come, a 1961 that promised to be his crowning moment. Unfortunately, that was not the case, and it ended up being the year in which the greatest tragedy Formula One has ever seen occurred. 1961 was Ferrari's year. The team had the most competitive car on the grid, and von Trips, who had left behind the shadow of Count Crash, had become the leader. That year, he won in the Netherlands, won again in Great Britain, and added podiums in Belgium and Germany. In this way, he arrived at Monza as the championship leader with 33 points, 4 more than his teammate Phil Hill. There were only 2 races left in Italy and the United States, so the title would be decided in France. For the 2 Ferrari drivers to be crowned world champion, Von Trips only needed to finish on the podium. With a 3rd place, it would be enough for him to fulfill the promise he made to his father and become the first German Formula One champion. In the Constructors' Championship, Ferrari also had everything in their favor. For Lotus to surpass them, their drivers would have to win both at Monza and in the last race in the United States. So the team was 1 step away from securing both titles in front of their home crowd. Besides, the setting couldn't have been more symbolic. The Italian Grand Prix at Ferrari's home, the legendary Temple of Speed. But back then, Monza wasn't the circuit we know today. It was the last time the full 10-kilometer layout would be used, combining the traditional circuit with the banked concrete oval. A spectacular layout, but also considered one of the most dangerous in the world. In fact, in 1960, many drivers and constructors had refused to race there, precisely because of the risks of those corners. So the organizers reached an agreement. 1961 would be the last time Formula One would race with that configuration, an agreement that would go down in history as one of the biggest mistakes the category has ever made. Despite that, the anticipation was high. Von Trips had never achieved a pole position throughout the season. Hill, on the other hand, had 5 in 6 races. But at the most crucial moment of the year, it was the German who qualified first. And Ferrari dominated the grid with the 4 best times. Everything was set for the German to become world champion and for Ferrari to also celebrate their first Constructors' Championship at home in front of their fans. Or at least, that's how it seemed. Because what was expected to be the perfect day for the team ended up becoming the greatest tragedy Formula One has ever seen. On September 10, 1961, 32 cars lined up on the starting grid. Monza was packed with fans eager to see Ferrari crowned champion at home. But the race started with a difficult beginning for Von Trips. Phil Hill took the lead, while he dropped to 4th place and ended up in a direct battle with Jim Clark and Jack Brabham. And barely on the 2nd lap, tragedy struck. On the straight before the Parabolica, Von Trips' Ferrari pulled alongside. The wheels touched, and in an instant, the German's car lost control. The single-seater lifted off and shot to the left. It went through the containment barrier and crashed into the area where the spectators were watching the race without any protection. The impact was devastating. At that time, seat belts were not used. So Von Trips was thrown from the car and died instantly when he hit the ground. His Ferrari, turned into a projectile, ducked. It plowed through the crowd. 15 spectators lost their lives, 11 on the spot and 4 more in the hospital. In addition, dozens of injured people were left at the scene. The track, which seconds before had been a temple of celebration, turned into a scene of horror. Screams, crying, desperation. The bodies were being removed while the cars kept speeding by because the race never stopped. On the contrary, it continued as if nothing had happened. The organizers argued that they suffered. Suspending it could cause the crowd to leave en masse, block the exits, and hinder the work of the ambulances. And while the doctors were fighting to save lives next to the track, Formula One kept racing as if nothing had happened. In the end, Hill won the race, and with it, the World Drivers' Championship by just 1 point over Von Trips. With that result, Ferrari also secured the Constructors' Championship. Phil Hill, however, never knew what had happened until that moment. After getting off the podium, when he saw the mourning throughout the entire team. Ferrari, as a sign of respect, did not compete in the last race of the season in the United States. Although Hill criticized the decision, he said that if Ferrari hadn't secured both titles at Monza, they would have still raced in the United States, regardless of what happened with Von Trips. He considered that gesture hypocritical and empty. Thus, what should have been the crowning moment for Von Trips and Ferrari turned into the greatest tragedy in history. The history of Formula One, however, something was still missing. Determining who was to blame and making them pay. But before that, if you've made it this far, you're probably enjoying the video, so subscribe. The tragedy at Monza shook the entire world. Von Trips had died at just 33 years old, and along with him, 15 spectators who had only gone to enjoy the sport they loved so much. 16 innocent lives were lost in an accident that drivers and teams had already warned was possible. But, as so often happens, the organizers decided to ignore it. For their part, the Italian press immediately pointed to Jim Clark as responsible, and the young Scotsman was charged with manslaughter. Clark, devastated, explained that everything had happened on the straight, right before entering the Peralta at the south end. Von Trips was on the inside of the track and he was following closely on the outside, when, suddenly, the Ferrari moved to one side. He said that at that moment, his front wheels touched Von Trips' rear wheels and the tragedy unfolded. The German's car lost control, bounced against his Lotus, and ended up crashing into the crowd. Finally, Clark was acquitted, and what happened was considered a racing incident. On the other hand, there were accusations against the organizers and the Monza circuit, which had to carry out a major overhaul of its safety measures. Among them was removing the embankment that contributed to the Ferrari taking off. Because of this, after that addition, the 10 km configuration with the banked oval was never used again. The layout changed forever. And in the end, no one really paid for what happened that day, neither for the life of Von Trips, nor for the lives of the spectators. Wolfgang von Trips was destined to be world champion in 1961. But his story didn't end with the coronation, but with his death and that of 15 innocent people who had only gone to watch a race, and one of the darkest that the category has ever experienced. But unfortunately, Von Trips was not the only driver who lost his life in a Formula One car. So watch this video to learn about the most heartbreaking, shocking, and cruel stories that forever mark the category. To learn about the most tragic deaths in the history of Formula One.